Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 690 for April 19th, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
It ticked all the boxes. It had limited exposure to the marketplace as big companies would know it. So it was an opportunity really to start from scratch and have a look at the inventory, which went back all the way to 1978, and just enjoy another journey.
Last July, Billy Walker stunned the Scotch whisky industry when he and his partners bought the GlenAllachie Distillery in Speyside from Chivas Brothers. That deal came just a few months after he left Brown-Forman, flush from the sale with his investors of the BenRiach, GlenDronach, and Glenglassaugh distilleries for more than $400 million. Earlier this month, the first single cask bottlings of the GlenAllachie were unveiled to mark the distillery's 50th anniversary, just ahead of the complete range that will go on sale in June. My interview with Billy Walker is coming up on WhiskyCast In-Depth, and we'll also get the answer to one of Scotch whisky's burning questions: how did the D in GlenDronach and the B in BenRiach get capitalized? That's all ahead on WhiskyCast.
This is Whiskey, Johnnie Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnnie Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. And we have some breaking news to start out with. Wednesday afternoon, Anheuser-Busch InBev announced that it has acquired the Adam Group, which owns the Master of Malt online spirits retailer, Adam Brands, which produces That Boutique-y Whiskey Company and other whiskeys and spirits, and Maverick Drinks, which handles the distribution for those brands, and also imports a number of U.S. craft spirits brands into Europe. The purchase price has not been disclosed. The deal was done through Anheuser-Busch InBev's ZX Ventures Development and Venture Capital Group, which has been behind many of the company's craft beer acquisitions. We've requested interviews, and we'll have more on this story at whiskycast.com and on an upcoming episode. Scotch whisky tourism is at all-time record levels, and Diageo is planning to invest £150 million over the next 3 years on the tourism side of its Scotch whisky business. The largest Scotch whisky producer plans to build a new Johnnie Walker brand home in Edinburgh, though company executives are still in the market for a specific site. All 12 of Diageo's 28 malt whisky distilleries that welcome visitors will get upgrades to their visitors centers, with a special emphasis at Cardew, Killala, Clynelish, and Glenkinchie. Those 4 distilleries are going to be referred to as the Four Corners distilleries within Diageo because of their strategic importance to the Johnnie Walker blends, and all 4 will have direct links to the new brand home in Edinburgh. Diageo recently invested in upgrades to its Guinness Storehouse experience in Dublin and plans to use some of the lessons from that project in creating the Johnnie Walker Center. Company executives have not been available for interviews this week, but we hope to have more on this story on this weekend's WhiskyCast. Gordon and MacPhail's Connoisseurs Choice range of independent bottlings marks its 50th anniversary this year, and the range is getting a new look as part of an overall portfolio restructuring for the family-owned company. Gordon and MacPhail currently bottles around 300 different whiskeys each year across 12 different ranges. But those ranges will be cut to 5, starting with the relaunch of Connoisseurs Choice this month. The company's Stephen Rankin explained that those 12 ranges might have made sense within the industry, but could be confusing to consumers. And the idea is to bring some simplicity back to the lineup, the way it was when his grandfather created Connoisseurs Choice in 1968.
Gordon MacPhail were the people that were introducing many to single malt Scotch whisky, because we were showcasing distilleries, and so many of them at the time you could not get as a single malt. And of course, in developing this range, George Urquhart was not only seen as initially as quite eccentric, I think the quote was eccentric to the point of mad, but actually in time it didn't take people long to realise what a pioneer he had become. And he was actually just helping to develop and create a whole new layer of within the whisky industry and within whisky categories, which was single malt Scotch whisky, and really truly define it, especially when with the ages he was bringing out. And in the words of Michael Jackson, he was showcasing aged malt whiskies while others had their heads turned to blends. But that's what we became famous for.
You can listen to my entire interview with Stephen Rankin in the news section at whiskycast.com. A new discovery range will debut later this spring with single malts that are labeled by either bourbon cask, sherry cask, or peated to help whiskey lovers discover which style of whiskey they prefer, while the new Distillery Labels series brings together the single malts that Gordon and MacPhail has been bottling for years from Mortlach, Linkwood, Glenlivet, and other distilleries. At the top end, the Private Collection series will also get new packaging later this year, while the Generations series name is still reserved for Gordon and MacPhail's oldest and rarest whiskies. The last release in that series was back in 2015, when they bottled a 75-year-old cask of Mortlach. No details have been announced yet on the next release in that series. Let's update a story now from January, when I talked with Rob Carpenter about his work to raise the funding for the new Holyrood distillery in Edinburgh.
That takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of, we've got a number of private investors involved, so it just takes some time to corral everybody and, make sure the money's in, the legal documentation's done. So, we're in that process from our perspective.
That goal has now been reached with £5.8 million of funding in place. That's around $8.25 million. Planning permission has already been granted for the project, and construction will begin in the next month or so, with distilling expected to start in June of next year. We'll have more on this next time around. Last week, we reported on Box Distillery's plans to change the name of the Swedish distillery to High Coast Distillery. According to Box, the name change was apparently prompted by a complaint from London-based Compass Box Whisky that the two names were too similar and could confuse consumers, especially as Box moves more and more into the export market. Box's owners decided it would be cheaper to change their name than risk a costly legal battle. Compass Box founder John Glaser declined to comment on the issue. There have been rumors floating around for a few weeks now on the potential for the return of Old Overholt rye whiskey production to Pennsylvania. Beam moved distilling of Old Overholt to Kentucky after acquiring the brand in 1987, and the Old Overholt distillery near Pittsburgh in West Overton, Pennsylvania, hasn't been used for much of anything since it closed in 1951, and production was moved to other distilleries in the state. While Beam isn't saying anything openly about its plans, we do know that distilling is going to return to West Overton, where Henry Overholt's old distillery is now part of the West Overton Village and Museum. Jessica Katie Barclay is the museum's executive director.
Well, I can't speak to all the rumors, but some of the rumors. We're opening up an educational distillery on site at West Overton. Period. That's what I can say.
Which is the home of Old Overholt. Will it be made there?
I don't know. I can't speak to that.
That's a Beam Suntory question, right? Because
that's a Beam Suntory question. But I do know that our project at West Overton, the educational distillery, we're looking at what can we make in an educational way, utilizing extremely local grains. So grains grown on original Overholt land.
And it's adjacent to the current museum, right?
Exactly, yep.
When might we hear something about something bigger?
I'm not sure. Hopefully before the end of the year. I wish I could say more.
You know more, you just can't say it.
Something like that.
Give me a sense of what it would mean to Pennsylvania distilling to have Old Overholt made in Pennsylvania once again?
I can't even imagine the excitement that would come to have a rye whiskey, Old Overholt, again in Pennsylvania would be amazing. But anything beyond me saying how cool it would be and how exciting it would be and how everyone would love it, I can't speak to anything else.
We've contacted Beam Suntory to either confirm or deny any of the rumors, but have not yet received a response. We'll keep you posted as more details become available. The Spirit of Speyside Festival is coming up the first week of May in Scotland, but the festival came to New York City for the first time on Monday night. Each year, the festival has its own whiskey awards, and for many years, the winners were selected by visitors attending various festival events around Speyside. A couple of years ago, the judging expanded outside of Speyside, with tastings in Germany and the Netherlands, and last year, the Lunar Rogue Pub in Fredericton, New Brunswick, held the first ever North American judging session. The Lunar Rogue held its 2018 judging a couple of weeks ago, and longtime festival volunteer and board member Ann Miller of Chivas Brothers was in New York for Monday night's judging at the Brandy Library.
We just thought that New York was such a dynamic whiskey area of enthusiasm and appreciation of whiskey. There are so many great whiskey bars here in New York that it just seemed a no-brainer to try to do something here. It was just a question of finding the right partner, and we're doing it with the Brandy Library, which is a fantastic venue, and making it happen. Unfortunately, I'm in New York anyway this week. I was in Florida at the end of last week doing some events, so the whole thing came together perfectly, and I'm just about to set off and set up a tasting for everybody. So the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival comes to New York.
How does this competition work? Normally, in the past, until you started doing these remote judgings, it was up to people at the various events within the festival to taste them, right?
That's right. We held a number of judging sessions at a number of different venues throughout Speyside over the 5 days of the festival. And at the end of it, we totted up all the marks and announced the winners. So people who wanted to vote had to be in Speyside. And that was absolutely fantastic. But it just seemed a good idea to try to see if it could be something we could spread a bit further, because people all over the world enjoy whiskies from Speyside. So we have done the preliminary round was exactly the same as in the past. We had around 10 expert judges who did a blind tasting of around 45, 50 different single malt whiskies in the different categories, and they whittled them down to 2 finalists in each category.
So let's go through the categories. What are they and what are the finalists?
Well, the categories are divided up into 3 age groups. So under 12 years and under, 13 years to 20 years, and then 21 years and over. And then this year we've also added a non-age statement category, because there are a lot more whiskies in that category now than there were even a few years ago, and some of them are very interesting indeed. So those are the categories that we have, and I can read you out a list of the whiskies if you'd like me to do that people will have the opportunity to taste.
Of course.
So starting with the 12 years and under, we have Strathina 12-year-old and Glenfiddich 12-year-old. So the choice is to vote for one or the other, blind. And then in the next age group of whiskies from 13 years to 20 years, we have Abelard 18 years old versus Glenmurray 18 years old. So that's going to be an interesting category. And then as we move into the older age group, we have a Cragganmore special release, which is a 25 years old, and it's up against Glenfiddich 21 years old. And then when it comes to the non-age statement category, which is very diverse, we have Glenmurray Classic Chardonnay versus B. Glenlivet Nadura Peated Cask. So this is a cask strength whiskey. So I dare say that will be one category where it will be very easy to tell which is which. The others, it might be slightly more difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's going to be a pretty easy choice in that one.
Well, so it was interesting that a peated cask whiskey made it through into the final. Clearly the expert judges must have been impressed by all of these whiskies, because it was very close in some of the categories, I believe. I wasn't actually allowed to count the votes. There were people who were better at doing it than I am. But I was aware of them saying how impressed they were by the standard of the whiskies, once again, that were entered, and what a rich range of whiskies there were to represent Speyside.
The winners will be announced at the festival's closing ceilidh on May 6th at the GlenAllachie Hotel, and we'll have more on this year's Spirit of Speyside Festival with Anne next time around. And speaking of GlenAllachie, with tourists roaming all over Speyside during the festival, that's the perfect opportunity for the folks in the town of GlenAllachie to raise some money. The Village Council will be holding its annual Whisky Auction at the GlenAllachie Village Hall on Sunday, May 6th during the festival. Most of the proceeds will go to help fund maintenance work on GlenAllachie's parks, tennis courts, and other public facilities, while some of the whiskies to be auctioned will also benefit other charities. We've posted a link at whiskycast.com for the Village Council's website, where you can get more information on the auction. And finally, former U.S. First Lady Barbara Bush passed away Tuesday at her home in Houston, Texas, at the age of 92. For our purposes, it's not as important that she passed away as the lesson that she taught us on her way out. According to her family, she spent Monday night surrounded by family, talking to friends on the phone, and sipping bourbon all evening long. We should all be so fortunate. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Spring is here, and that means it's almost time for The Light, Highland Park's newest limited edition release. Look for the details at highlandparkwhiskey.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Style edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Style. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Lestau edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. A new whiskey cast in the middle of the week? What's going on here? Each week we bring you the latest whiskey news and interviews, but there is so much happening in the world of whiskey that we've decided to start producing 2 episodes each week. This way we can bring you news that happens early in the week sooner, instead of waiting a few days to cover it that weekend. Now, there may be some weeks when we only produce 1 episode, like during the holidays, for instance, but the best way to make sure that you stay up to date with us is by subscribing with your favorite podcast app and following us on social media. Right now you can take our Twitter poll, just how much WhiskyCast is too much. We'd love to get your feedback. Let us know what you think on social media or by emailing us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's open up the inbox now for this week's Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. A couple of weeks ago, we had a question from Shamal Ramachandran of San Diego. He was heading over to Japan and wanted some guidance on whiskey shops to visit and whiskeys to look out for. And we got Japanese whiskey expert Dave Broom to share some suggestions. Shamal's back home now and posted this note along with a photo on the WhiskyCast Facebook page. Mark, thanks for all the feedback on this topic, and thanks for having Dave Broom chime in as well. I've now returned from Japan, and the advice I received here was most useful. As expected, there are no gems left on store shelves. There certainly are bottlings that one can't find in the U.S., at least not easily. I found a somewhat decent selection at Shinanoya in Tokyo and Yamaya in Kyoto. And here's a picture of what I brought back. Nothing spectacular, just different. Some here are likely imported distillate merely matured in Japan. I suppose when it comes to Japanese whiskey, at least for now, we must take it as we get it. Well, I took a look at that photo. The only one I've had of the 5 that he brought back was the Nikka 12-year-old, which is a blend of malts from Nikka's Yoichi and Miyagikyo distilleries in Japan, and the rest are all distilled there as well. Now, Spencer Jacobson posted this note on our Facebook page after last week's interview with Terrasentia CEO Earl Hewlett on his OZ Tyler Distillery's new bourbon that's produced with the TerraPure process. Mark, thanks again for blowing my mind on a molecular level. I'm usually on the edge of my seat while listening to WhiskyCast, but I think I was floating over my seat on this one. Bill Ricker of Boston at N1Vux on Twitter had this reaction to the changes coming for Gordon and MacPhail's portfolio after we posted our story on the WhiskyCast website. You didn't ask if they'll be retaining or ruining the historic nature of the distillery labels. The new CC labels look easy to read, nice, but save some history on the classics. There is brand value in the old distillery labels that G&M had rights to from ancient times when most distilleries didn't do official bottlings, like Mortlach, Scapa, and Linkwood. I responded to Bill that we did not address it because that new label design for the range has not been revealed yet. But the folks at Gordon and MacPhail did jump on Twitter with this response to Bill's comment, and I'm not sure who posted it, but here's what they said. I have a lot of confidence in saying that I think you will be pleasantly surprised with the distillery label's bottlings released this summer, with a winking emoji following that. After we posted a story Monday about Diageo's Scotch Whisky tourism plans at whiskycast.com, Mark Norman of the Craft Beverage Corporation weighed in with this response. Why is Diageo pouring so much money into visitor centers? Simple. It is much more than picking up a glass of whiskey and enjoying the flavor of it. People want to see the places that are producing what they drink. They are into the experience. The senior executives at Diageo, and probably all the other producers, know that if they want to retain these Scotch drinkers, they need to make sure that when they come to visit, it is the best possible experience that can be had. Beverage drinkers are changing, and smart business leaders know they need to change too. Very good point, Mark. As we've reported before, visitor centers have now become a profit center for many distilleries, both large and small. Even though they may not have an impact on distillery production or a major impact on profits, they do help create long-term affinity and brand loyalty among consumers. And Michael Williams, at MIWilliams283 on Twitter, tweeted out this note from Sweden after researching his ancestry, proving that Haddonfield, New Jersey, home of WhiskyCast, was not always a dry town. My ancestor was running a store there in the early 1700s, and we was selling dry goods, whiskey, and tobacco. That's right, Haddonfield only went dry at the start of Prohibition, and never decided to allow liquor sales again once Prohibition ended. But one of our little town's historic landmarks is the old Indian King Tavern. Back in July of 1776, after they signed the Declaration of Independence, a few miles from here in Philadelphia, most of the Founding Fathers got out of town quickly to avoid being hanged by the British for treason. And many of them wound up celebrating with a few ales at the Indian King Tavern before they split up. Just a little bit of history for you, and thanks for sharing your story, Michael. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com, or find us on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. If you've deleted all of your social media accounts, that's okay. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com. And Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Tickets will go on sale this Friday, April 20th, for September's Bourbon and Beyond Festival in Louisville. We had a preview of the bourbon lineup with promoter Danny Wimmer and Fred Minnick back in episode 683. And this week, the music headliners were announced with Sting, John Mayer, Sheryl Crow, and many more. I'll be there leading some of the bourbon workshops as well, and we have a link to the festival's website on the calendar of events page at whiskycast.com. Other events coming up much sooner. Apogee in Paris, France will host a Heaven Hill tasting April 23rd. Lock and Key in Los Angeles, California has a Suntory Japanese whiskey tasting and dinner on the 24th. Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville, Kentucky will have its 13th anniversary celebration on the 26th and its annual Kentucky Derby handicapping dinner on the 30th. The Bristol Whiskey Festival is April 28th in Bristol, England. The Las Vegas Indie Spirits Expo is May 3rd, and that same night is the Water of Life charity tasting in New York City. The Spirit of Toronto is May 5th, which is also Kentucky Derby Day, and New York's Belmont Park Racetrack will have a bourbon festival at the track that day. Right now, we have 297 different events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a whiskey tasting, festival, or other event coming up, just use the contact form on our website and let us know all about it.
This is whiskey. Johnnie Walker's Scotch Whisky. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. This is what they sound like.
Because you're a cheeky wee blighter.
Dance like. Aye, like that. This is what they do all day. Building the great character of Johnnie Walker Black Label. Aging in oak for 12 long years.
Thanks. Oh, it's gorgeous there.
What is character? It's giving a damn.
You're alright, lassie.
Which looks like this, as much as this. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes.
Put the bloody game on the telly, Ella.
A whiskey as bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnnie Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Cut.
Can I drink this now?
Johnnie Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whisky. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. Billy Walker could have ridden off into the Scottish sunset last year after winding down his work with GlenDronach, BenRiach, and Glenglassaugh distilleries. He and his partners sold those distilleries to Brown-Forman in 2016 for more than $400 million. But he surprised the Scotch whisky world by putting together a team of industry veterans a few months later to buy the GlenAllachie Distillery in Speyside from Chivas Brothers, which had used its whiskey almost exclusively for blending. The deal also included enough whiskey stocks to launch the GlenAllachie as a standalone brand for the first time and bring new life to the old White Heather blended Scotch brand. GlenAllachie Distillery is marking its 50th anniversary this year, and Billy Walker has been busy creating a new range of GlenAllachie single malts that will debut in June. What have you done with GlenAllachie since taking it over? I think everybody thought that you were going to enjoy some time off after leaving BenRiach and GlenDronach and Glenglassaugh, and doing the GlenAllachie deal was a bit of a shock for everybody. What prompted it?
Oh, interesting question, Mark. Everybody has to get up in the morning with a purpose. The opportunity came up, and it was a kind of challenge that we're probably good at, taking a blank canvas and trying to paint a nice picture. Distilleries, mature distilleries, and distilleries with significant mature inventory are difficult to find. And it's just an opportunity that came up after a relatively casual discussion with the Chivas personnel. And once I was aware, we were aware of it. It was a fantastically exciting opportunity. As I say, It had limited exposure to the. It ticked all the boxes. It had limited exposure to the marketplace, as big companies would know it. So it was an opportunity really to start from scratch and have a look at the inventory, which went back all the way to 1978, and just enjoy another journey.
What was the most interesting thing you found going through the place when you were doing your due diligence?
Well, first of all, the location is just spectacular, beyond belief. But we had a look at the inventory. We knew that there would be some interesting things, and we've looked at. I think we acquired something like 30,000 casks. We've probably looked at all of anything. The 5,000 oldest casks we already had a fairly interesting in-depth look at. So we know that there is some very good and very interesting liquid and some very good and very interesting wood. But of course, our style, that we will take some of this inventory and change the direction of travel with putting it into some different wood, some newer wood, and all kinds of varieties of wood. And it's kind of it's territory that we know, we're familiar with, and we know what it can deliver.
With the distilleries you had before, a lot of that was sherry wood that you put things into. Are you going to do that again? Are you doing that now at GlenAllachie?
And we've started the whole process, and we started almost virtually the day we took over. The wood management will play a significant role in sculpting the kind of whiskey profile we want to achieve over a period of time.
Which is going to be what?
Well, the interesting thing about GlenAllachie, Mark, is that although it's a Speyside, it's a pretty full-bodied Speyside. So it's Johnnie and wood. It can carry wood flavour, a whole variety of wood flavours, in a pretty well balanced way. But there'll be quite a big emphasis going forward on PX and Oloroso casks, some virgin wood, and some of my own personal favourites like Moscatel, Sauterne, and Marsala. So we have things in our mind that we want to do and deliver against.
Let's talk about the first release of 6 bottles, 6 single casks from older barrels that you're releasing now ahead of the worldwide launch this June. What went into picking those 6 barrels that we talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago?
We looked, as part of the process of evaluating the older inventory, David Keir came up with the idea of recognising the 50th anniversary of the distillery by making an interesting release to coincide. And we tried to choose casks that would give a fairly wide variety of the kind of flavour profiles that we can deliver. And I think they've achieved that. We've got some hogsheads, we've got some barrels, some butts, sherry butts, and at various ages. So it was a nice opportunity to showcase what GlenAllachie can do coincidentally with the 50th anniversary.
And then you've been working on the core range that comes this June. Tell us what you have coming.
Under the GlenAllachie umbrella, we will have a 25-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old cask strength. And that'll be launched into the market in June.
With additional releases after that, obviously?
Yes, we're lining up a whole variety of things in terms of the current wood management we're putting in across a variety of ages. But in addition, we acquired the McNair label, which historically had been a blended whiskey, and we will, quite soon after releasing GlenAllachie, we will release the McNair's richly peated blended malt whiskey under the kind of subtitle Limerick, and that will include a 21-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an on-age.
And I was about to ask about the blend because we hadn't heard about your plans for that yet, but I knew you did get one. So
Well, that's a blended malt. We also acquired White Heather blended Scotch whisky, and we've taken a lot of time to look at the best opportunity for rehabilitating that brand and taking it to market. And we will introduce a 21-year-old White Heather with one or two interesting twists that will catch the imagination.
And you're not going to tell me what those twists are yet, right?
Not yet, but maybe later.
I didn't think so, because you would have said up front. That brings up an interesting point here, because your track record in blending has always been for blending single malts.
Yeah.
And this is going to be the first chance we have to see you work on blends. Tell me about the difference that you're looking at as you go into creating your own blends for the first time with both the blended malt and the White Heather blended Scotch.
You know, the challenge is no different, Mark. The reality is that while we live in a world just now where single malt whiskey is very sexy, but you know, blended whiskey is an extremely important part of the jigsaw, and at the very premium end of the market, where you can actually engage with some wonderfully old grain whiskies that allow the malts that you put into blend to express themselves. It's a great challenge and a great opportunity. But we want to operate at the premium end. We don't want to be involved at the lower end of the market.
If you're starting with a 21-year-old White Heather, I think that makes that pretty obvious.
Yeah. And it's where we're comfortable. It's a territory we understand. I don't think we don't want to sound conceited, but we think we are good at operating that end. We understand quality, and for sure, nothing will go into the bottle that disappoints. It's got to be top end.
Now, going back to the GlenAllachie for a second, how many markets are you going to be in at launch in June? I know you've got a U.S. deal, and I know you're in something like about 35 countries. Am I correct on that? Or how many countries do you think you're going to launch in?
I think we will launch into just about that number. I'm not sure if it's 35, but it'll certainly somewhere between 25 and 35. And we've had a huge expression of interest in quality people and companies wanting to take the ranges on.
Is that because of your track record with BenRiach and GlenDronach and Glenglassaugh?
That sounds conceited, Mark. There's a lot of contributing things. I think, as I said, single malt is quite sexy at the moment. It's quite interesting that we are a 100% Scottish-owned team. There's a number of things at play which are creating an interest. And, it's not easy, and it's pretty rare nowadays that you can get your hands on a mature distillery with the kind of inventory profile that we've inherited. So yeah, people are interested, and I think they probably know that there will be some quite quirky things that we can do along the way.
You brought up your Scottish ownership team, and I want to turn to that for a second, because we have a lot of folks who listen to the show who are involved in the business world and working team building and building groups from scratch. This is your second crack at it now with the team that you've got at the GlenAllachie after first building your team at BenRiach and then expanding out. What did you learn from that first experience that helped you build your team this time around?
Oh, interesting question, Mark. I mean, listen, if you can engage with good people, interesting people, hardworking people, people with an appetite to learn, then you've got a great start. And that's what happened with the previous team. We were fortunate, I think, in that when we bought BenRiach, the single malt market was beginning to happen. The last 10, 12 years has seen a significant development in that area. So we've taken on board people who are very familiar with the kind of routes to market that we want to engage with. And that really is about, we don't want to be in supermarkets or multiple retailers too early in our development. We want to be with the kind of people who understand the category, will work for the brand, become brand ambassadors, and we will be very much out in the market in one-to-one experiences, making sure that we're talking up and GlenAllachie and making people experience as much of the kind of happening that we're experiencing.
How did you build the team specifically this time around? When you were putting together your investor group to buy the distillery and then the staffing to run it, how did you pull it together? Was it people that you already knew from within the business that you'd worked with before? Was this a chance to build a dream team of the folks that you wanted to work with? How did it work out?
It kind of was that. We had a team of people. We had some colleagues, friends, relationships who we had talked about over the period when I was kind of running down a commitment to Brown-Forman. We had a lot of discussions about with the people who are in here now. Would you be part of something new? Because every one of these people is absolutely steeped in the industry and totally understands the kind of things. They know all the boilerplate, Mark. They know whiskey. It's not. This is a passion. It's not a job, and it's the case for almost all of them.
One final question, and this is going to be a bit of a cheeky one. You're going to capitalize the A in GlenAllachie?
Already done it.
I couldn't resist asking because everybody knows that was sort of your trademark at the previous shop. What's the story behind that? Why did you decide to do it? Was it just for trademark reasons or what?
It's just a kind of personal signature.
How'd you come up with that one for a signature?
Well, it's interesting, Mark. When we acquired BenRiach, I didn't think it looked right with the small R. I thought putting the capital R in the middle gave it resonated much better. Certainly in my eyes, it resonated much better. And it really worked for BenRiach. I think it worked for GlenDronach too. And I'm pretty sure it worked for Glenglassaugh. At least the new owners haven't changed anything.
And so there was no question you were going to do it at GlenAllachie?
There was no question. But GlenAllachie also lends itself to it because it was quite a long name. So having the capital letters somewhere in the middle, actually, it gives it more presence and substance, in my opinion.
Sort of like the whiskey.
Sort of like the whiskey. Full-bodied.
It appears Billy Walker also has an eye for design to go along with a nose for whiskey. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, Isla's legendary single malt. The 2018 batch of cask-strength Lagavulin 12-year-old will be out later this year as part of Diageo's annual special releases. But until then, you can find the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distiller's Edition, and the new 8-year-old at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. And let's start off with the Pure Scott Blended Scotch. This one comes from Ian McMillan and his team at GlenDronach Distillery and uses some of the GlenDronach stocks that Australian entrepreneur David Pryor acquired when he bought the distillery out of administration. Pure Scott is bottled at 40% ABV, and the nose is fruity and floral with notes of fresh-cut grass, straw, fresh berries, a hint of peaches, ginger, and citrus. The taste starts off soft and smooth, with spices that develop slowly, and touches of baking chocolate, honey, and fruit that layer in on top of the spices for a nice complexity. The finish is medium length and gentle with soft spices and subtle fruits. I'm scoring the Pure Scott Blended Scotch an 89. Next up, the original from the English Whiskey Company. This single malt is bottled at 43% ABV, and the nose is malty and fruity with touches of tree fruits, honey, and vanilla. The taste has a citrusy tartness with lemon pepper spice, honey, vanilla, barley sugar, and just a hint of butterscotch. The finish has a lingering tartness with just a hint of maltiness, and I'm scoring it an 88. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, proud to announce the release of a new series of Old Fitzgerald bottled in bond bourbons. Bottled in an ornate decanter inspired by a 1950s original, It carries on the legacy of John E. Fitzgerald and his act of larceny. Learn more at heavenhilldistillery.com/blog. Think wisely, drink wisely. Jim Beam recently expanded distribution of its Distiller's Cut bourbon that previously had only been available at the distillery and a handful of Kentucky retailers. It's made from 5- and 6-year-old bourbon with no chill filtering, and it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has notes of honey, vanilla, charred oak, brown sugar, and dark chocolate. The taste is spicy with black pepper, allspice, a hint of lemony tartness, oak, chocolate fudge, and honey. And the finish is long and slightly dry with honey, brown sugar, and subtle spices. I'm scoring the Jim Beam Distiller's Cut a 92. Finally, let's look at the Rebel Yell Single Barrel. It's a 10-year-old bourbon sourced from an undisclosed Kentucky distillery and bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has those classic bourbon notes of oak, chocolate, caramel, vanilla, and honey, with just a hint of molasses. The taste has a thick, oily mouthfeel with good spicy notes of cinnamon and black pepper, balanced by honey, vanilla, caramel, and brown sugar. And the finish is long with chocolate fudge, lingering spices, and a hint of honey. I'm scoring the Rebel Yell Single Barrel a 91. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I've added these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,100 whiskeys from around the world at WhiskyCast.com. That's also where you'll find links for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos, the latest whiskey news, events, cocktail recipes, the whiskey photo of the week, and much more, including a complete archive of past episodes. Our cask strength conversation continues all week long online. You'll find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and my email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is whiskey, Johnnie Walker's Scotch Whisky. From this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnnie Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.